Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Kris. I got my real filled it's rum and coke, and I know I put way too much rum in it. God damn, I did. Ain't no coke in there. Ain't no coke at all. Oh, that was not good. Woo! I developed an accent on that, didn't I? Woo! Huh. I started talking like I was from Louisiana. Oh, that wasn't no coke in there. Nope, no, not at all. Alright. This is the Aztecs. From refugees to, was it Hegemons? Hegemons? How do you say the word? Hegemon? No. Hegemons? It doesn't sound right in my head. But why debate it when we can just hit the video and listen to it? Like and subscribe or I'll kill you. And video.
This video is sponsored by Brilliant. This educational platform has a great offer for our viewers, which you can learn about at the end of this video. In the middle of a marshy island, so useless that the 1 million people living in the lands around it saw no reason to claim it, rose an empire of people with such a fierce will that they smashed every obstacle placed in front of them and conquered their world. Gold, silver, feathers, chocolate, bark paper books, and lines of captives destined for sacrifice streamed into the metropolis that was Tenochtitlan, along its innumerable streets and canals. Is this all water? Is this... They built it all on... Oh, these are all their canals? No shit, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry, I'm learning just like you guys, but you probably already knew this. Constantly moving anthill was the center of the Aztec Empire. This is the story of how a destitute people conquered their world. By the 13th century, Mexico had already seen the rise and fall of great urban civilizations, such as the Teotihuacanos and Toltecs. Called Anahuac by the Mexica, the Valley of Mexico was home to over 1 million people, making it one of the most densely populated areas on Earth at the time. It had been a hub for urban civilizations for thousands of years. Now, 2 new states had achieved dominance over the region: Culhuacan, located in the south, and Azcapotzalco in the northeast. It was into this already long-established world that the Aztecs suddenly entered. They were the last of the nomadic tribes to migrate into the valley from the north. The valley was already quite full, and so the Aztecs were repulsed and ejected from wherever they tried to settle. They may have spoken Nua, the language of the great Toltecs, but other than that they were completely alien to the civilized inhabitants of the region. The Aztecs, however, brought an unmatched skill in warfare, and soon found themselves fighting as mercenaries for both Culhuacan and Azcapotzalco. But their penchant for violence and sacrifice soon disgusted their employers.
C. Okay, so they're missing the C. P. Okay, sorry, they're not the same at all. I'm looking at them and I'm seeing the same, but no, there's the Potzalco and this is Colco. Okay, sorry, I was just like, wow, they got 2 cities with the same name. They don't even start the same, Kris. Sorry.
After sacrificing the daughter of the king of Culhuacan, the Mexica were driven into Lake Texcoco. Their patron god, Huitzilopochtli, had promised them that they would find their true home when they saw an eagle poised upon a cactus eating a serpent. Upon entering the blue water of Lake Texcoco on a miserable swampy island with little arable land, no wood nor stone, they saw their god's sign. They settled there in 1325, but it would be another 50 years until they were organized enough to name a king, a Camapichtli. Barely a century later, this destitute people had soaked up the culture of the region, named themselves as the successors of the Toltecs, and began an incredible series of conquests. The Mexica built their great empire by forming a triple alliance with two other city-states, Texcoco and Tlacopan. Together they sacked Azcapotzalco and became the dominant power in the region. Now free of any competing states, the Mexica conquered from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific, and then south towards modern-day Guatemala. Flooded with plunder, their capital, Tenochtitlan, soon surpassed Teotihuacan and Toltec Tula. Great palaces, pyramids, and gardens rose out of the waters on Lake Texcoco, as the Mexica built a floating city that left the Spanish conquistadors gasping upon first seeing it. Soon Tlacopan and then Texcoco found themselves in the back seat of an alliance dominated by the ever-growing power of the Mexica. By 1500, the kings of the other two states were basically civil servants to the Mexica emperor. Taxes and tribute were supposed to be divided amongst the three, but it appears that the Mexica in Tenochtitlan shared what they wanted when they wanted. This triple alliance formed what we know as the Aztec Empire, and was on its way to becoming a single-headed Mexica-run state when the Spanish arrived. It's important to note that this is the Aztecs' own history of themselves, not an exact and perfect timeline of events. And it is known that a certain Mexica advisor, Tlacaelel, a man that helped forge the Triple Alliance, transformed Huitzilopochtli from a tribal god to the supreme patron of the Mexica, massively increased the emphasis on human sacrifice, and essentially established much of the imperial systems of the empire. He also erased much of Mexica history. In order to promote the new Mexica Empire, he burned and destroyed evidence of their humbler past. Let's take a closer look at Tenochtitlan, its full name being Mexico Tenochtitlan. One of the Spanish soldiers, Bernal Diaz del Castillo, wrote this about his initial impression of the city. "We were amazed on account of the great towers and pyramids rising from the water, all built of masonry. And some of our soldiers even asked whether the things that we saw were not a dream." The city was unlike anything in the old world. It would have been bigger than any city in Spain, with a population of at least 250,000, possibly more, making it one of the world's largest cities. The Spanish particularly found the botanical gardens and zoos to be extremely impressive. The Mexica had transformed the poor land into highly productive gardens through canal irrigation and the use of chinampas, which were highly fertile artificial islands. The city became so productive that it could support a population level that, after being nearly wiped out by the conquistadors, their native allies and smallpox, would not be reached again until the 20th century. The citizens used the canals for transport as much as they used the streets. Hernán Cortés speaks of the people talking as they go along, some on the land, the others on the water. The main causeways leading to the city were cut by wood bridges, which could be removed in case of attack or if a canoe needed to pass through. Water was the superior means of transport in a country without a single draft animal. Within the city, teachers and students met in the Calmecac and Telpichcalli. These schools were where most Mexica children received educations, making it one of the only societies at the time where nearly all were educated. Streets and canals were jammed with merchants and porters that brought tribute and goods in from across the diverse empire. The Aztecs ran a tribute-based empire. So rather than invading lands, killing everyone and taking over the territory, they instead forced their past enemies to pay tribute. Everything else stayed the same, People kept their kings and gods and homes. This made the Mexica incredibly rich and widely hated. Pyramids and palaces.
When Elvis opens his mouth and he sings, you know him.
As far as Elvis goes,
Damn. Not enough coke in there.
Pyramids and palaces dotted the city where priests praised the gods and carried out bloody sacrifices. Aqueducts brought fresh water into the city, and every day thousands of street cleaners swept across the city to keep the main streets clear and neat. All on a...
What kind of civilization is this? All things considered, this is a civilization that's like ahead of its time for the time it was around. Yeah, I mean, and then on the left corner I see the sacrificing. I'd say that sets them back a little bit. But I mean, street sweepers, zoos, botanical gardens, man-made islands, or woman-made islands. I mean, that's amazing to me. Just amazing to me.
A tiny island in the middle of a lake. Let's move on to what is probably the most controversial and infamous aspect of Aztec civilization: human sacrifice.
Yeah.
If you know anything about the Aztec civilization, it is most likely this. That they practiced human sacrifice is beyond doubt. To the Aztecs, there was no activity more glorious than capturing men on the battlefield or to die there for Huitzilopochtli. The culture of Mexica sacrifice is best explained by Michael D. Coe. The victims were ideally enemy warriors. When an Aztec took a captive in action, he said to him, "Here is my well-beloved son," and the captive responded, "Here is my revered father." After the victim had been ritually bathed, there were 5 possible modes of sacrifice. The usual one was by stretching the prone body over a sacrificial stone, opening the chest with a knife of flint or obsidian, and ripping out the heart, which was then offered to the gods. All warriors believed that they were destined to die this way, being transformed on death into hummingbirds, which went to join the sun god in his celestial paradise. In all likelihood, several hundreds, perhaps even a few thousand young men so lost their lives in the Aztec capital each year. This was done because in the Mexica worldview, the gods needed nourishment, worship, and payback. The world had a finite amount of energy, and the gods needed energy to keep the universe alive. Thus, energy had to be released from living things to pay the gods. It was necessary in order to ensure the sun rose each morning. Each time a priest took a life, they were keeping the doom of their world at bay. Due to this cultural trait, Mexican warfare had a huge emphasis on capture rather than killing combatants on the battlefield. Men that would have died of their wounds...
Okay, so the people who were sacrificed, did they think it was an honor? Because I gotta say no. I gotta believe they did not want to be sacrificed for another culture, another group. You know what I mean? Am I wrong on that?
Or infections on battlefields elsewhere, instead died on sacrificial stones in Mexico. This also resulted in events known as flowery wars, a perpetual war where both states would fight but never finish each other off, primarily fought against the Tlaxcala. If the Aztecs had focused their might on the war, they could have wiped out the Tlaxcala, but it would take a huge toll on their empire and resources. So they instead pinned down the Tlaxcala while at the same time guaranteeing a constant stream of captives and training. The Mexica also instituted economic sanctions on the Tlaxcala and forbade anyone from trading certain items with them, such as cotton and salt. Without knowing it, They had provided a powerful and well-trained ally to the Spanish, as the Tlaxcala would supply infantry and refuge to Cortés. Let's have a look at the military aspect of the Aztec Empire. Mesoamerican warfare in general is fascinating, as it was very different from that of the Old World. For one, the cost of movement in Mesoamerica was so much higher than in the Old World. There were no animals that could be used to transport anything, which obviously had an enormous effect on warfare. Without horses or donkeys, the soldiers had to carry their provisions themselves, or would need special porters to do it for them. This meant that Mesoamerican armies could rarely travel for more than 8 or 9 days on their own supplies, so waging wars more than 50 or so kilometers away was a logistical nightmare. Promotion in the army was based on the amount of captives a soldier took, and if a man proved himself, he may join one of the knightly orders and become a jaguar or eagle warrior. Your average Mexica warrior would be equipped with a round shield and a wooden sword tipped with razor-sharp obsidian blades, known as the macahuito. Some would have bows, but most would be equipped with an atalato, a spear-thrower device that hurled projectiles, along with thick cotton armor. When battle started, it was unlike anything in the Old World. Warriors would spread out and fight one-on-one in separate duels, trying to knock the other out rather than kill them. Nobles and generals wore highly visible symbols, tall reed and feather constructions. This was so that they could be easily seen in battle and their deeds noted. However, it only made it easier for Cortés and his men to find them during battles and wipe out the Aztec military command easily. All of this puts into perspective how the final war of the Mexica was doomed. The Mexica and Spanish were not fighting the same war. The Mexica wasted precious time capturing Spaniards or their native allies in battle, while the Spanish focused on killing as many soldiers as possible. Even when the war was lost, the Mexica would have assumed a bitter negotiating process was about to begin, where the Spanish would demand tribute, just as the Mexica did when they conquered. They could never imagine that their entire civilization, along with their gods and emperors, would be snuffed out. In our series on the pre-Columbian civilizations, we learned about the many inventions.
Wow. This is a really great, awesome video. There's more Aztec stuff that I definitely want to do. Keep looking into. But I'm going to go ahead and end this here. I'm on a roll tonight. I got a rum and coke that's finally tasting decent. It doesn't taste like rubbing alcohol. See, I muted that burp for you because I'm a gentleman. Alright. I'm going to end this here. Have a good day. Have a good night.